paper, which is part of my thesis. I'm a PhD in sustainable development at the University of Brasilia, and the topic is gender dimension of the land, water, food nexus in the Brasilia semi-arid region. Alright, I'll follow the introduction, present some research problems and issues to give an overview, and then follow the methodology and results and conclusion. Okay, the start statement is that the problem of the undernourishment and hunger is a kind of distribution problem rather than production one. I think it's the simple statements. And I think the response behind this is the complexity behind that we need to face. And in my research, we already know that the distribution problem is associated with poverty in terms of income, access to food, okay? It's a distribution problem, but then when you disaggregate it, especially in rural areas, we get into more details and layers when we're dealing with access and security, sovereignty, and autonomy, okay? Let's disaggregate this statement of the distribution problem and then apply to the rural areas, as is in case of my study. So we already know that the roots is related to social inequality, then rural poverty, and moderate and severe food security. Even it's the paradox in the contradiction. People in rural area, they are suffering from food security in different levels of moderate and severe food security. I think it's a big paradox even in countries as Brazil, which is a kind of commodity exporter of commodities like soy, maize, and everything else. So for targeting this issue, we are dealing with family farming, of course. We are not dealing with agribusiness and these other long green revolution approach. So my focus in this research issue is the productivity food capability. So I'm applying my unity of study as a rural settlement in the northeast of Brazil. To give an overview, I think when we directly present a study case, it's hard to connect with other countries and to have a global perspective. So I brought this data in terms of food price to get to know that vulnerability, farming family, vulnerability to food price is a common issue in every global country. Even after the pandemic, and I think it's really interesting to get to know this food price index by FAO. I think it's really interesting to get to know as well this global big data. We can have a general idea and picture about the issue. And then I also brought this land matrix data. It's a kind of big data, and it's very interesting to get to know the importance of the smallholder agriculture, because in Brazil we have the IBGE, that is our National Geographic Data Collection, and we know that who is feeding the internal consumption of Brazil is the smallholder. It is not in Brazil, because in other countries it's the same reflection of this issue. So when we started to know this agrarian and food, because my research is really interested not just about access to food, but connect agrarian issues with food crisis issues, not access to food, but the capability to produce. So the smallholder has a significance in the world, in the global projection. And I think this land matrix really value checking, because it's an independent monitoring initiative, and they capture a lot of course, dealing with this land rush, especially in the low and middle income countries. And according to the current land matrix data, in approximately 40% of the deals with information farmer users, big of this land rush was previously or is currently used for smallholder agriculture. So when you study this land rush in Brazil, we relate to conflicts, especially indigenous territory, especially on this kind of vulnerable people. So I think it's really important to associate that this land rush, connected food, production of food, soil, is associated with this superposition with conflicts behind. That I think is an invisible thing, an invisible data. We talk about land matrix, but we don't know that we should put it in evidence that there's violence behind in terms of socio-territorial conflict. So there's this kind of contradictions and missing points and already existing linkage. In terms of existing linkage, we already know the SDGs agenda, trying to put this kind of nexus approach, but we still have missing points, especially to address these agrarian questions, this agri-food question. Yeah, of course, the gender thing, I think it's still, we don't know effectively how to put in practice cross-cutting issues in terms of intersectionality. Of course, dealing also with race. In Brazil, have the quilombola people in the territory. That is also a big issue. And of course, we also have the picture of households with our study case. We get this picture and this image of the household, but how to do it with the national level? It's always this a kind of scale. And even though we try to be a systematic, complex, and trying to put this holistic overview, systematic approach, we always are disaggregating and put as a dichotomic, urban versus rural, even though in Brazil there are a lot of discussion already in terms of ruralidades, which is a more peri-urban, which is more cross-cutting than this kind of versus. So how to overcome this dichotomic analysis? Because even though we try to put a complexity and holistic approach, we tend to reproduce a kind of duality. So just to have an overview, we know this SDGs agenda. My criticism is about the SDGs to about zero hunger, and hunger to food security, improve nutrition, promote sustainable agriculture. But when they say sustainable agriculture, what does mean? What does mean sustainable agriculture? And I was connecting with the Jason conference right now, and he's saying this sustainable agriculture could be this kind of environmentalist of the rich, because of course the FAO is implementing this kind of sustainable agriculture. It's agroecology, it's organic food, or it's a greenwashing in terms of organic certification, you know? So I think it's, we have to criticize, okay, the SDGs promote something interesting. When we see the targets, they already there's some provision of the gender. We could discuss, but they already prefer, like this target 2.2. Nutrition needs of adolescent girls, pregnant and lactating women, in terms of and all forms of malnutrition. And the target 2.3, they say about the double the productivity and income of small-scale food producer. In particular, they prefer the vulnerability of women, indigenous people, family farmers. So we could think, okay, we already have a gender perspective, but I think with the academic study tend to criticize if go more in deep. Okay, it's kind of progressive, the SDGs, but there are limitations, of course, and we need to be aware how to translate this, for example, in the national level, and then in the local level, when we talk about household. So, about the sustainable agriculture, they say to implement a resilient agricultural practice that increase productivity and production. Okay, we are coming from the first statement. It's not a matter of production, but then a matter of distribution. I don't know how to this general increase of productivity could really criticize the first statement that is a distribution problem, but they are putting as a utilitarian productivity thing, in my opinion. So I think we need to go into details when we see these targets. And coming from also the food price volatility impact, just to have some picture about the inflation nowadays and how it's a global thing. It's not about Brazil, it's not about Latin America, it's a global thing. I'm not going deep to this because I think it's enough for now. But this report from Brazil also put in evidence this inflation in food access. So after 2006, we already see this increasement in food price in Brazil. Then we see that inflation was around 5%, and this is a longitudinal perspective, but in the last 2022, we see that inflation was 5% in the inflation specifically related to food and drinks, bebidas it's drink, like was 14%. So the inflation in food is higher than the inflation in general products in consumption in Brazil. Just put in evidence that who pay the price? The people and the vulnerable people. And in terms of income, sorry it's in Portuguese, but groups of family income to minimum wage, they are the people who pay more to eat rice and beans, which is like the most popular food to feed. It's rice and beans, and they are paying the price with the more inflation. We have to think tribute. We have to think including about the reform in tributing, because people are paying more to eat. And it's really interesting. I brought this graphic because we see here that the production of fruits is decreasing in Brazil. So we are exporting commodities and producing less fruits. And it's really interesting because in my research, in doing the field work and applying the questionnaire, the surveys, we saw that people are not, the farmers, they are not having more garden, yards with some fruits anymore. So they prefer having some monoculture and have some income and going to the supermarket and having food. So it's a paradox. And I think this reflects the global picture. It's not a household local issue, it's a more national thing. So now, focus on my local and specific research. This study case is in the northeast of Brazil. This is one of the most vulnerable parts of Brazil, where you see the increase of poverty, inequality compared with other regions. The north and the northeast, the most contrasting in terms of inequality. It's a rural settlement, and we choose some with criteria of representation and antiguity to decide to collect and apply questionnaire surveys in different parts of this rural settlement.
So you've got about 5 more minutes, so.
Okay, I'll go fast.
Sorry. Think about which pieces to tell us.
Okay. We put in the nexus framework. It's part of a study from our research group, the socio-ecological nexus approach, to understand that it's not about food, water, and energy, the classical nexus. We have also the socio-ecological perspective, including political institutions. In terms of gender, we identify the gender thing with the community identify as a relevant thing, and we apply also a matrix to understand in terms of security, food security, in terms of quality of food, quantity, safety, stability, and sustainability. Sustainability more focused on the agroecological practice. So the results, when we starting describing our survey, we decide to disaggregate in 2 questionnaires, one related to household decision making and other access to public policies. So that's why we put questionnaire 1 and 2. Was in February last year that we applied just after the pandemic going slow down and we could have the allowance to do in the field work. We have different stage and disaggregating with the gender thing, the feminine and masculine. This Braço Erguido is the agro-village that we applied it for. These are pilot application of the questionnaire, and we choose 5 agro-village and try to compare in terms of gender. And generation in terms of succession, rural succession, we saw that the first generation prevail a male presence, and the second generation we start to see a female prevail. We decided to do this generation because it's a rural settlement in terms of land access and ownership. We saw that there is a kind of farm exit from the younger generation. That's why we could like to capture this kind of succession. We disaggregated into generation. And this is some data in terms of access to school, access to social benefits, and we saw the woman. We also disaggregated in rural and urban, and we saw the vulnerability more of the gender. And we identify that Nossa Senhora Conceição, which is the agro-village more vulnerable in terms of access to food and more, of course, related to the income absence and failure. And to conclude, capturing a really delimitation of one of our results and evidence and the need to go toward a feminist agroecology, because we saw that women which put in practice yard and gardening, having some hortifruti, fruits and gardening in general, they could have more security in terms of this volatility thank you, of price. And to conclude, I focused then with a lot of results. We decided to take a closer look in the agroecology practice that we found some women then. And agroecology is not about lowering agrochemical inputs. It's about increasing sustainability. It's about self-determination and reclaiming control, decision-making control of own food, land, and a right that has been stripped from the majority of producers, especially from women, by productivist and profit-driven industrial agriculture paradigm, as kind of Jason also put today. And such, agroecological transition and transformation are often recognized for the potential to support the empowerment of marginalized groups and individuals, and also as a capacity of adaptation, resilience to reduce gender inequities. Yeah, I think that's all. Thank you. Yes, sir.